Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In today's video, we are going to be previewing the upcoming season for the Boston Celtics. The reason why I chose to do the Celtics today is because they are the favorite team of my beloved grandfather, Jerry Loker. Love you, Pop. However, before I get too far into it, I want to remind you all to leave a like and subscribe. I've been appreciating all the support that I've been receiving lately, and I hope to see that continue. Without further ado, let's talk some Celtics basketball. Before I can really preview the season for this team, though, I'd like to reflect upon and discuss the transactions that this team made in the recently concluded NBA offseason. It started in the NBA draft, where they selected Aaron Nesmith with the 14th pick. I thought that this was a decent selection for the Celtics. My favorite guy for them at this part of the draft would have been Tyrese Maxey. But it would appear that they decided that they wanted to address their need for backup shooting on the wings. I would have preferred for them to take Saddiq Bey over Aaron Nesmith because I think that Bey will be a similar, not quite the same level of shooter, but at least a somewhat comparable shooter at the NBA level. And I also think that Bey will have a bit more juice off the bounce as a playmaker and shot creator. And I also think that Saddiq Bey is going to be a more impactful defensive player than Aaron Nesmith. But Nesmith does have a much higher shooting potential than Bey does, especially coming off screens and things like that. So I can certainly understand what the Celtics are doing here. A pick I don't really understand is taking Peyton Prichard at 26. Prichard was an interesting player for me coming into the draft because he really can shoot it at a high level, similar to Nesmith. It really appears that the Celtics wanted to address their need to add more shooting in this draft. However, if they were going to take a point guard here, there were a couple other options that I certainly would have preferred. Malachi Flynn was one of my favorite players in the draft. I had him rated in my top 20, and I think that he has a comparable skill set to Peyton Prichard, maybe not quite as high level of a scorer, but I think that he's going to be a comparable shooter, a better playmaker, and a better defensive player. So I certainly would have taken Flynn here at 26 over Prichard. Other guys such as Trey Jones, I would have preferred here if the Celtics were locked in to taking a point guard. Yam Madar, I would have preferred over Peyton Prichard. So this wasn't my favorite pick for the Celtics, but once again, like I said before, Prichard's a high-level shooter, and it really does appear that that is a need that the Celtics wanted to address in the draft. With the 47th pick, they selected Yam Madar, who is a draft and stash player. I don't know too much about Yam, but from everything I've heard, he has a chance to be a pretty solid player at the professional level. It'll be interesting to see how soon the Celtics bring him over. I think he's currently playing in Israel. In free agency, well, I guess we'll address the final draft night move that this team made. They traded Enes Kanter in the 30th pick for 2 seconds. Kanter went to the Trailblazers. The 30th pick went to the Grizzlies, and the 2 seconds came back, one from each team, if I'm not mistaken. Pretty much just a salary dump, and they wouldn't have had room on their roster to keep around that 30th pick, so they decided to just ship it off and get some future draft capital. Kanter was essentially a salary dump for them to create more space to utilize their mid-level exception. They also did another salary dump where they traded Vincent Poirier in exchange for a future second-round pick. Tristan Thompson was then in free agency, signed to a 2-year, $19 million contract. This was not my favorite move. I had a feeling Thompson was going to get something like the mid-level, but I was not sure that he was deserving of that. The only thing he really does at a high level is rebound, and as we've seen over the past couple of years, that is a declining skill. Andre Drummond is probably the best rebounder in the entire NBA, and he was essentially traded for a bag of chips from the Pistons to the Cavaliers at last season's trade deadline. And overall, having a high-level rebounding big man just is not that important to having a winning team. Thompson is not... Well, I guess we'll get more into Thompson a bit later. I will discuss him more in depth in the season preview portion of this, but you get the picture. I'm not a huge fan of this signing. They also brought in Jeff Teague on a 1-year minimum. It's a minimum contract, not too much to say here. I would have preferred a guy like Shabazz Napier because I think Napier is a higher level shot creator than Jeff Teague, who is also quite a bit better on the defensive end of the floor, but Teague has more experience. He's going to be a veteran option for this team at the point guard position, and for that reason, I understand the move. Now that we've reflected upon the offseason for the Celtics, I think we're ready to preview the upcoming season. During this segment, I give my expectations and some predictions for each player on the roster, and I also, at the end of the video, take the accumulation of all of those player thoughts and make my prediction for the team as a whole for the upcoming season. As usual, we'll start at the point guard position. The starting point guard for the Celtics is Kemba Walker. I think that the Kemba Walker hate has been unreal recently. I couldn't believe when I heard the Celtics were trying to trade him for like a pick between 5 and 10 in the draft. I think that Kemba Walker is far too good and far too valuable to be traded for something like that. I might be higher than Kemba than most are at this point, but I actually thought that last season he had a pretty good offensive season. Obviously, his playmaking numbers went down, but that's largely because he moved from Charlotte, where the secondary playmaker was Malik Monk or Nicholas Batum, and he came to Boston, where the secondary playmakers were guys like, or I guess Kemba Walker was probably the secondary playmaker, but the other guys who had the ball in their hands on his team were Jason Tatum, Gordon Hayward, and Jaylen Brown. So he wasn't asked to carry as high of a playmaking duty, but he shot the ball at a really high level. It was around 38% for the regular season. Scored the ball as well as you could expect for someone who was essentially a second or third option for much of the year. On defense, I actually think he had one of his better seasons. He really held up at a decent rate at the point of attack. He's a smart defensive player and he gives good effort, and those assets alone make him an average defender. I get that he didn't play well in the playoffs, but he was coming off of an injury and he wasn't never able to establish a rhythm. And I think that this season we should see Kemba Walker bounce back. So I really don't get the hate. I think ESPN rated him as the 47th best player in the NBA for this upcoming season, which I found egregious. I think that he's still a top 35 type guy, maybe even top 25 type guy. But I'm still on the Kemba Walker bandwagon. I still think that he's a borderline all-star level player, and I'm excited to see him play once again in this upcoming season. Hopefully he's able to come back healthy, because I do know that he's going to be out for a little while to start off the season with that injury that really has been plaguing him for the better part of like 6 to 8 months at this point. The backup point guard on this team, I think it'll probably be Jeff Teague, at least to start the season, getting minutes over Peyton Prichard and Tremont Waters. Teague, like I said before, is not much more than a minimum contract vet to have at the end of your bench, but he's going to be asked to step into a pretty large role for this Celtics team, and I don't think that bodes very well for the Celtics, because he was pretty bad last season in Atlanta. He really struggled to take care of the ball, was very turnover prone. His playmaking numbers have severely declined since his glory days as an all-star, fringe all-star level point guard in his first stint with the Hawks. Like I said before, he's very turnover prone. He still has an ability to put his head down and get to the rim, but he's never been a great finisher at the rim, and now that his playmaking has fled him, overall, I just don't see much offensive value here. And on the defensive end, it's not pretty. So overall, I don't know. I think that Jeff Teague is not someone you can rely upon to play big minutes if you want to be successful. And I think that depending on how long Kemba's out, the point guard spot could be a real struggle for this Celtics team moving forward. Maybe an Isaiah Thomas destination to watch out for. I mean, who wouldn't love that? Isaiah Thomas coming back home to Boston, but that's pure speculation on my part, so we'll move on. Peyton Prichard is probably the third point guard on this team at this point. Prichard, like I said before, very high-level shooter. He can score the ball very, very well. I remember watching him at Oregon last year and just being so impressed with how much heart this kid played with. He was terrific, had multiple 30-plus, many 30-plus point games, was definitely in the conversation for first team All-American, and I believe that he actually was named to that first team All-America list. So clearly, Peyton Prichard was a high-level college basketball player. A big part of that was also that he was pretty solid on the defensive end of the floor, and I really question whether or not that's really going to transfer over to the NBA level. He's not a super athlete, but he plays hard and does a nice job with team defensive stuff. I don't know if he's going to be able to hold up at the point of attack, though. That remains to be seen. He also wasn't much of a playmaker at Oregon. He's really a score-first guard. And for someone as small as he is, scoring is going to be much harder at the NBA level than it was in college. So I'm not sure if he'll be able to score at the same level. And if that is the case, he's going to have to become a higher level playmaker if he wants to work out as anything much more than an end of the bench, backup point guard, maybe even third point guard on a team type of player moving forward. Now that we've covered the point guard position, I think we're ready to move on to the wings. Obviously, it starts with Jason Tatum. Tatum took a huge leap last season. He was my pick for most improved player. I just think that the steps that he took as a playmaker and defender were so outstanding, and it's no discredit to Brandon Ingram because I think he also made a huge jump, but I think that Tatum's jump from being like someone who people were saying, well, maybe he could be an all-star someday, to being a genuine all-NBA level player was just a more impressive and bigger improvement in my mind than what Brandon Ingram did in becoming like kind of in the same position as Tatum as a potential future all-star, but he just didn't take as huge of a jump. So I personally would have given it to Tatum, but I definitely understand why Ingram was the recipient of the award. But getting back to Jason Tatum, he's really become one of the best wing players in the entire NBA. We'll start on the offensive end where he's an elite shot maker, terrific three-point shooter, shot at 45% for like his last 15 games of the regular season. If I'm not mistaken, he can really score it. He's got a nice couple moves that he can use in order to create space for himself and get a nice driving lane to get to the rim. He has a really nice hesitation. He's pretty good at utilizing the Euro step in order to create that space, like I said before. Terrific shooter. He's made improvements in his playmaking. He's able to put his head down and get to the rim and also find players both on kickouts and also dump-offs to big men for dunks. We saw Daniel Tice really capitalize off of that oftentimes last season. He's also terrific on the defensive end. He can hold up on ball, but where he's most spectacular is off the ball. Time and time again, it felt like watching him play last year. He was able to jump passing lanes and create opportunities for himself to score in transition. He's really a menace off of the ball defensively. He uses his length to its maximum advantage. He's just a really special player. I view Jason Tatum as a player who's jumped into being a top 15 guy in the NBA. I think that this Celtics team is going to be quite a bit worse than the one last year was. A little bit of a spoiler to the video's ending. But I also think that they have a pretty high ceiling still, because if we could see Jason Tatum take yet another jump and become like an MVP level player, then I do think that this Celtics team could compete for a championship once again, despite the loss of Gordon Hayward. The next guy here is Jaylen Brown. Brown is kind of the opposite of Tatum on the defensive end of the floor. He's okay in team rotations. We see him lose track of the ball sometimes and he ends up getting beat. But on the ball, he's an absolute menace. He does a great job of taking advantage of careless dribbling as he forces turnovers at a high rate. It's very hard to get around him. He can take on very challenging matchups against opposing big wings, guys like Kawhi Leonard, Giannis Antetokounmpo, LeBron James. He's capable of taking on those matchups. It's not necessarily something you want to do because it takes away from his offensive output, which is outstanding as well. He legitimately became a very high-level three-point shooter this season, and that is really where his jump came. He was a borderline all-star last year. I think he'll be a borderline all-star yet again this season. And it's largely because his three-point shooting went from around league average to being well above league average at 38% from the three-point line last season. He's also capable of shooting off of the dribble, similar to Jason Tatum. They both have very good pull-up jump shots. But where Brown really thrives is off of catch and shoot opportunities. He's also much improved attacking closeouts, which is an opportunity he has quite frequently considering the space that players like Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker create for him. And because of that, he's able to get to the rim quite frequently. He also made a step forward as a free throw shooter and got much closer to being like league average from there instead of being the minus free throw shooter that he was for the first 3 seasons of his NBA career. Where he needs to really take a step forward is in his playmaking in order for him to go from being like a top 40, top 35-ish player and really jump into the conversation that Jason Tatum has put himself into as like a top 20 player. Jaylen Brown's going to have to become much better at playmaking. His assist percentages were low last year, and he needs to be able to find open teammates off of those drive opportunities that I talked about before. But overall, because of his on-ball mastery on the defensive end as well as his great three-point shooting, Jaylen Brown has become a really high-level wing player in the NBA, and I still think that he has plenty of room to grow in this upcoming season. Marcus Smart is the next guy here. Smart is one of the most fun players to watch in the entire NBA because he plays with his heart on the line, game in and game out. He always leaves it all out there, and that's always fantastic to see. In terms of the actual basketball stuff, he's one of the best defensive players in the entire NBA. He's terrific both on the ball and off the ball. On the ball, he's an absolute pest. We see him take on very difficult matchups, oftentimes guarding the best player on opposing teams. And off of the ball, he is a smart enough player to put himself in the right position to take advantage of mistakes by the opponent. He jumps passing lanes all the time. You see him take charges like few other players in the NBA can, and he's genuinely an all defensive team level player. It would not shock me to see him maybe be the player to break the streak of big men and wings winning. Well, I guess he kind of is a wing. So it wouldn't necessarily break the streak of big men and wings winning the Defensive Player of the Year, but I genuinely think that Marcus Smart is going to be in the race for that award this year. On the offensive end, he also is solid. He's a pretty good playmaker, does a nice job of creating secondary penetration, and can also kind of create shots off of the bounce for himself. Makes pretty good decisions generally on whether to kick it out to shooters or find a big man for a finish. Where he struggles, though, is sometimes he becomes a bit of a chucker. He shoots threes that don't make any sense. They're out of the flow of offense. It's a lot of pull-up type stuff where it's like, come on, Marcus, you can get that at any time in the possession. Why do it 5 seconds in? But that's part of him playing with everything on the line. He's not afraid of the moment, and sometimes, as Celtics fans know better than anyone, that's not necessarily a good thing. But overall, Marcus Smart is a highly positive, impactful player on this Celtics team. On that ESPN ranking thing that I talked about with Kemba earlier, they had him ranked in the top 40. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think he's much closer to like the 60th best player in the NBA. But he's so impactful on the defensive end that I can't necessarily blame ESPN for making that claim either. Next guy is Romeo Langford. Langford is injured starting the season, which is a bit of a bummer because I think that he was going to be a helpful guy for this Celtics team off of the wing. He's a super athletic driver who can finish at the rim at a very high level. The problem with Langford on the offensive end, though, is that he's not much of a shooter, and he also doesn't quite have elite enough burst in order to get around guys at that high level that he needs to. If he can't shoot, so the jump shot is going to have to improve. It's going to have to get up towards that league average mark in order for him to garner enough respect to really have players close out on him so that he can attack those closeouts. But if he does improve, that 3-point shooting, he's genuinely got a lot of potential as like a 3-and-D wing who can also do a bit more as a shot creator off the bounce because he is really good defensively. Like I said before, he's a good but not great athlete. So he's not terrific on the ball, but he does a good enough job, and off the ball, he seems to usually be in the right place and makes the right rotations. I was a pretty big fan of him coming out of Indiana. I watched him quite a bit as the Big Ten fan I am, and I was pretty happy to see him go to Boston. I think that it has a chance to be a nice place for him to develop, learning from elite wings like Tatum and Brown. And I'm hopeful to see him get back on the floor very soon. The next guy here is Aaron Nesmith, the rookie out of Vanderbilt. Once again, a very high-level 3-point shooter. I don't really see what else he can really do. I think that he has a chance to establish a role for himself as like a J.J. Redick, Alan Crabb type guy who can just shoot it off of any opportunity. He has a super mobile shot. He's able to move it around and still get up really good looks. We saw him shoot it at an extremely uncontinuable level at Vanderbilt this past season, where he shot 52% in small sample size because he was mostly playing against bad teams. He sat out most of the SEC schedule for the Commodores, but with that shooting ability, he's going to be able to hopefully help this team coming off the bench. However, like I said, he did have an injury last season, and he hasn't really played competitive basketball since like the non-conference season. I'm not even sure if he's played an actual game of basketball in all of 2020. So that's not a promising sign. For that reason, I'm not sure he'll be in the Celtics rotation right away. But as he continues to get his sea legs back under him, I think he has a chance to be an impactful player off the bench for this team because of his high level as a shooter. Next guy here is Grant Williams. Williams is a really interesting player to me. I think that he's so smart that he's able to play a role at a high level. He does a nice job of, as a passer, both out of short rolls in the pick and roll, as well as just off of moving the ball around. He does a nice job of swinging it and making the right decision in the flow of the offense. He's really good defensively, does a great job in team defense, and he is a pretty good on-ball defender. I genuinely think that he can guard twos, some ones, but like not the high-level ones, and some fives, but not like Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic and Karl Towns. So he pretty much can guard 2 through 4 at a high level with some ability to guard 1 through 5, and that's super valuable. That defensive flexibility and versatility is a very good attribute to have. And with that, in combination with his team defensive ability, I think that he's got a shot to be a really, really high-level defender in the NBA. And he already was that in his rookie season, so who knows what his ceiling is defensively. The questions come more on offense. Like I said, he is a good passer, but he hasn't shown that he can do much more than that. If he can become a plus 3-point shooter, though, I think he has a chance to be a very, very high-level role player because of that defensive ability and an ability to space the floor as a guy who can play both the 4 and the 5. I'm not necessarily as big of a Grant Williams believer as a lot of people are because that 3-point shot is a big question for me, but if it does work out, I can see that this guy is going to be an impactful player coming off the bench for the entirety of his NBA career. The last guy here is a personal favorite of mine, Semi Ojeleye. I've really liked Ojeleye since the first time I saw him play at SMU, not MSU. Southern Methodist was where he attended college. I believe they made like a Sweet 16 run in his last season as a collegiate player. And going into the draft, we saw him go in the second round to the Celtics. And since then, he's really dug out a niche for himself in the NBA as a role player who can guard on ball and also off the ball at a high level. He's not a defensive playmaker. He doesn't have high steal percentages or block percentages, but he does a really good job of keeping guys in front of him, keeping them modest, and limiting their scoring opportunities. That, in combination with his really good 3-point stroke off of corner threes and catch and shoots, and corner threes on catch and shoots only, make him a pretty solid role player. Where he needs to improve is in the rest of his offensive game. If he can be a somewhat respectable guy attacking closeouts as well as someone who can actually shoot it above the break line of the three-point line, that's where I think he has a chance to become a really good role player instead of just like a niche role player who can take on difficult matchups against big wing players when you need him to. Overall, I'm a big Semi Ojeleye fan, and I'm willing to bet on him continuing to improve as his NBA career continues. Daniel Tice is the next guy here. He has terrific feel for the game, is a plus rebounder despite being an undersized center, is very switchable defensively, can guard multiple positions on the perimeter, which is a really nice and valuable asset to have as a big man. On offense, like I said, he has good feel, which allows him to be a pretty good passer from the center position, and he also is an okay finisher at the rim. We saw him stretch out his jump shot to the three-point line in the bubble a little bit, and I think that that's an interesting trend if we can see him become a higher volume three-point pick-and-pop big man. I think that that will just make him all that much better. I think that he's probably, well, I'd say he's definitely the best center on this roster. I'm sure some people would make the debate for Tristan Thompson, but I'm not a huge Tristan Thompson fan, so I believe Daniel Tice should be the starter. Overall, I'm a pretty big fan of his, and I think that he is a good complementary option to this current core for the Celtics. Tristan Thompson is the next center here. Like I said, I'm not a huge fan of his. He's a really good rebounder, but as I outlined in detail at the beginning of the video, I don't think that that's super valuable. People will contend that his ability as a switchable big man is valuable, and I do agree with that, but I don't think that he's as switchable as someone like Daniel Tice is, and that limits how valuable he can be on the defensive end of the floor since he's really not a great rim protector. He was better last season, but he still has never been a high-level rim protector in the NBA. And on offense, he's really not much of a finisher. He's not a very good free throw shooter, and I really don't believe that he helps your team out all that much on that end either. So mostly, he's just a rebounding big man who can do some interesting stuff defensively. I don't buy that as being a super impactful guy. I don't think it's worth the mid-level exception, that's for sure. And I think that Daniel Tice will probably be the better option of these two centers as the starter moving forward for this team. The last guy to talk about here is Robert Williams. Williams is an interesting player to me. He's pretty much someone who's comparable to like Mitchell Robinson in my mind as a rim-running big man who can finish at the rim at a high level. I feel like I heard something about he's developing into a pretty good passer, but I don't necessarily remember noticing that when I watched the Celtics last year. Mostly what I saw was someone that is a high-level cutter and rim runner in pick and rolls who can really throw down dunks above the rim. And on defense, he is a block-happy rim protector who is also very foul-prone. If he can iron out that fouling tendency, he's got a chance to be a really good rim protector. And if he can improve his offensive game, make himself a bit more of a threat off of the dribble, I don't even know. I think that what you see with Robert Williams is pretty much what you're going to get moving forward, and that's a really athletic rim runner and rim protector, but he needs to bring down the fouling tendency. If he can do that, then he's got a chance to be a starting center in the NBA for a long time. Overall, when talking about this, they also have two-ways, Tremont Waters and Taco Fall. I don't have too much to say about either of those two. I guess my favorite thing to point out would be that I think there's a 20-inch height difference as Tremont Waters is 5'10" and Taco Fall is 7'6". So yeah, I think that's pretty funny. But outside of that, I don't have too many strong opinions on either of those two players. But overall, getting back to the NBA squad, I think that this Celtics team is going to be pretty good once again. Their fate, in my mind, really relies upon two things: the health of Kemba Walker and how good is Jason Tatum really. If he's a top 15 player, I think that this team is probably like the 5th or 6th best team in the West. If he's a MVP level player, that's when they can compete with teams like Milwaukee and Brooklyn, in my mind. I'm sure lots of people will disagree with that and put this team up there, regardless of whether or not Jason Tatum can take another jump. But if he doesn't, I really don't think that this team is super deep. Once you get past Kemba Walker, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, and Daniel Tice, you get into the bench, and off the bench, the guys that I'm comfortable in a playoff rotation are like Grant Williams, Semi. You can't really play either of those two guys at the same time, so that's not much there on the wing. At the point guard position, like I said, I'm not a big Jeff Teague fan, and Peyton Prichard is going to be a rookie. And then Tristan Thompson and Robert Williams at the big man position are solid, but they're not super impactful. So overall, I think that this Celtics team took a significant step back. It'll be interesting to see if they can add anything with that Gordon Hayward trade exception. I think that that is one of the more interesting storylines moving into the season and something that's been really talked about less than it should be. But generally, I'm not as high on this Celtics team as I was last year when, as a Bucks fan, they were the team that scared me most in the East. Clearly, I should have been more scared of the Heat, but I just think that this Celtics team took a step back. If this were a regular 82-game season, I think they'd probably win somewhere between 45 and 48 games. So in this shortened season, if I were to make a prediction about the win total for the Boston Celtics, I would say that they will win 40 to 44 games. However, like I said, if Kemba Walker is healthy for the whole season and Jason Tatum takes another leap, then I think that they could get into the conversation to win many more games than that and be a really high-level contender in the Eastern Conference. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Like I said, I made it for my grandpa. He's been going through a difficult time lately, so prayers up for him. But the Celtics are his favorite team, so I thought that he might appreciate the action if I made a video about them. So leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy. I think that's going to be it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you all again very soon.